Well, Fiona, we've had a robust conversation about your book, The Lions of Fifth
Excellent.
Avenue, about Laura Lyons and Sadie Donovan, including who might play them in the movie that's going to be made.
I like it.
We've talked a bunch, obviously, about the New York Public Library and the thefts. And, um, for everyone that's with us, I want to let you know Gramercy first hosted Fiona for the launch of the masterpiece, her book in 2018, and then again for the Chelsea Girls last year. So we're really thrilled to have you with us this time in our virtual book club space, Fiona.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry it has to be virtual, but I'm so delighted and really honored you picked the book for the book club.
And I wanted to remind our book club participants that this book of yours, Lions of Fifth Avenue, is your fifth novel, that all your novels are historic and set in iconic New York City buildings. And I also want to mention, and Pat alluded to this just before you came on, Fiona, but that you're the co-editor of a collection of short stories called Stories from Suffragette City that's coming out in late October. And, a landmark 1915 protest for women's suffrage is the setting for the stories in what I know is a rousing anthology. And it's written by 13 of today's best-selling authors. And I know you contributed to one of those stories as well, Fiona. So I'm just going to now kind of put you and Pat Losinski, your meeting kind of virtually here. Pat's been our wonderful moderator. He's the CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Library. He's going to be asking you questions from the participants as well as his own. And everyone's now muted, so you and Pat can directly converse. And the floor is now all yours.
Hi, Fiona. Welcome from the office at the Columbus Metropolitan Library. I could have been at home, but I thought I needed to be in the library mode when I talked to you. So
I love it. It's so nice to meet you, Pat. Thank you so much for doing this.
well, we're all excited to have you here, and so much interest in your book, and we were having a great discussion, but it came to a halt quickly when you made it into the waiting room. So we're glad you're here. We have asked our participants tonight to submit their questions, and I've been asking them questions in the book talk. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to start with a question that's close, near and dear to my heart, and that is, I try to ask this of authors who we host. Tell us, if you will, about your childhood memories of using the public library and its influence on you as a writer.
Yeah, that's such a great question. It was very important to me as a kid because we moved around a lot. And the one thing that was always constant was that once a week we'd get in the car and go to the library and take out books. And, my brother would head to trains, I would head to Judy Blume. And it just was reading was the one thing that helped me, I think, escape from a new town or a new school and having to make new friends. And so I would just get lost in books, and the library was a huge part of that because, you didn't buy books as much back then. And the library was very important. Yeah, so no question. So when it came to the dedication for this book, I knew what it had to be. It had to be for librarians everywhere.
Well, I was sort of marking as I was reading along, and so appreciative of the reverence that you showed for libraries. And we talked about book thefts and how indeed that is a part of our world, and is certainly felt real. So let me get to one of the questions from one of our guests. How do you go about your historical research, which is seems so thorough? And how do you choose what to include accurately and what to make your own?
That's it's a really good question. The way I like to describe it is I do a lot of research where I find out the facts. So I find out, excuse me, for example, that there was a 7-room apartment deep inside the library that was built for the superintendent and his family. And, anything like that's a surprise, I know I should use in the book. That's always a sign. I get a tingle that says, all right, a family living in a library, okay, we can work with that. And I really go out and interview architectural historians to find out about the building. With this book, I was interviewing librarians who had dealt with rare book theft, including one who'd been at Butler Library at Columbia, where they stole $1.8 million of rare books over 3 months. It was an amazing experience talking to her about what that felt like. And then once I have the facts, I start getting ideas for the characters and the plot. And so I like to describe it as kind of creating a scaffolding of historical fact, and then layering a plot and fictional characters over it, and then explaining as clearly as I can in the author's note what is fact and what is fiction, because I know historical fiction readers especially love to know that, you know, what's real, what's not.
And how about your process in itself? And that is, when you've assembled this research and you're starting to think about characters, how far along are you into sort of laying out the entire story before you begin in earnest? Or is it a discovery process for yourself in terms of understanding where these characters are going to go?
You know, I do know the plot beforehand because there's 2 timelines and an element of mystery that really drives the story forward, where I'm dropping in clues and red herrings. I really have to know what needs to happen when, so that when I braid the 2 timelines together, I'm not giving away too much in one timeline ahead of what the reader needs to know. And so I do, you know, figure it out very clearly and plot it out, and I have a chapter by chapter outline that I go by. But the characters always change in shape and scope as I go along. And so Sadie in an early draft was even more kind of acerbic. And I pulled her back and tried to humanize her a little more. And so there's always that shaping. It's like if you have a big thing of clay and you're slowly creating the, you know, the profile and the eyes and the nose. It's the same with writing, where your words are taking shape so that the characters hopefully become more interesting and more complicated with each draft.
Well, librarians everywhere, thank you for making her less acerbic in this novel. So another question from one of our guests tonight. What has been your favorite book to write? And was it because of the subject matter, or was it because of the research process, or both?
You know, it's very hard to pick a favorite. I would say one of my favorite buildings to write about, just because I got to go inside, was the Dakota. And that's the address. And because, you know, you can't get inside the Dakota, so that as a journalist, that made me even more determined to get inside. And so the way I did it was a friend of mine who's a real estate agent pointed out that Lauren Bacall's apartment was on the market for $23 million. And we basically got a tour, and I pretended as if I was about to, you know, pay all cash for Lauren Bacall's apartment. But it was, and later I did get to know someone who lived in the building, and I got a full tour from the basement up to the very top. So that was interesting for that reason. I think the lines of Fifth Avenue is important to me because it's the New York Public Library is really an emblem of New York City, and it's an emblem of resilience and knowledge. And so putting it in that building with all that it symbolizes was at first a little daunting. But then just by creating characters like Laura, who is surrounded by all this knowledge, but wants more out of life and needs to kind of go out into the city, the greater city, and down to the village in order to really figure out what her identity is. I think that journey really symbolizes what all of us who come to New York, and I've lived here for about 30 years now, what we feel like, where you find safety in something like the library, and then you eventually branch out and conquer all the neighborhoods, and then suddenly it's your city.
Well, my 24-year-old daughter is living on the Lower East Side, and one of our first stops was to the main library, so she would get her library card and know all about it. Everything else I knew would fall into place, but I had to take care of that.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love it. That's great.
So 2 questions about the Heterodoxy Club. Let me try to ask both of them, and I think you can take parts of this. I'm intrigued by the Heterodoxy Club and how progressive its members were. What did you find out about that group? And the other was, I was pleased to learn about the club Did you know about it beforehand, or did you discover it in your research?
I had no idea. And I don't think anyone had. It seems to be this club that was almost lost in time. And I discovered it by reading a book on Greenwich Village in the 1910s, just to get a sense of what the city was like. And then it mentioned the Heterodoxy Club, which led me to a book that was written about it. And I ordered that book and just devoured it, because it, the club was founded in 1912 by Marie Jenny Howe, who was this, feminist organizer. It attracted Agnes DeMille, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and it was a place where women, without, talking about it outside the club, they were allowed to really debate the passionate issues of the day, which included birth control, which included the right to vote, which even included free love, which to me feels like more of a 1960s topic. And so I was very surprised to learn that they were talking about it, in 1910. And so, yeah, the minute I learned about it, and heterodoxy is the opposite of orthodoxy. So it's kind of deviating from society's norms. And that's what they did, and that's what they were there for. And it was around for many years, and was just a really popular place for women to find their voices, which for me is what my books are all about, how women's voices and agency have changed over time or not. And so, to me, it was just a fascinating thing. And the minute I read about it again, I was so surprised. I knew it had to go into the book.
Before you came on, Fiona, I was alerting the participants that our peers at the Nashville Public Library, where Tennessee was the state that put the 19th Amendment over the top. So they have a woman's vote exhibit right now in their main library, and a new memorial in their Centennial Park. And the great thing about the urban libraries in this country is, Tony Marks and Brian Bannon at New York Public Library. I mean, we just all know each other and try to support each other. It's a wonderful profession because we're not in competition with each other. If you have a great idea, we'll take it and try to make it better, and you take our ideas. So, which leads to a question from one of our guests. Did you do any of the research in the library itself?
Yes, I did. I was very lucky in that the library was very open to all my questions. They gave me a great behind the scenes tour where I got to see the old apartment, which is now offices and storage, but you can still see where all the rooms were, what the windows were like, that it overlooked a courtyard. And that was very helpful. And on top of that, the New York Public Library has something called the Allen Room. And that's where writers with a book contract can have a desk. And so you apply to get in, and then you get a desk. And if you want, a book on, say, typhoid or the construction of the library, it gets delivered right to your bookshelf, which is a wonderful thing. So I would bring my computer to the library and hole up there and write away. And it was incredible because I was writing a book about the library in the library. And to just even walk through that foyer, it's so, all the marble and the sound of the voices all echoing around and all the tourists going in and out back when we did that was so inspiring. And to go and work there was a real joy. And the librarians were very, very helpful. I like to mention that there was one point where I emailed one of the librarians with a really important question. And it was in an early draft of my book when there was a dead body. And it's not there now, but there wasn't a dead body in an early draft. And I emailed the librarian and I said, look, if you had to hide a dead body in the library, where would you put it? And she wrote back right away. She said, yep, in the basement down by the carpenter's room. And I thought, this is incredible. And she admitted she'd never had that question before. And we're probably both under surveillance at this point, but it was so helpful. And I had, old floor plans from the old days, so I could really see what the rooms were like, where the bookbinder room was, and shape the story around that. So yeah, the library was just wonderful. And the day that the book came out on August 4th, they held a wonderful virtual event. We were supposed to do it in the library, but they pivoted like, all of us have had to do. And we did a wonderful event on Zoom for 350 people. So that was an incredible way to launch the book in partnership with them.
Well, the fact that she was able to answer that question so quickly means she'd thought about maybe one of her bosses and where she'd like to put the body. One of my favorites in that library, and we have a historic Carnegie as well, is on the marble steps. You see that from 100+ years of usage, you see there's a rounding almost as stones on the beach from the wave. You see that from 100 years of people walking into the library. And that also always gives me a perspective of, of how long we've been here and how long people have supported us. Fiona, is a great question here that says your book has a very cinematic quality, and I'd like to hear you discuss some of your research that helped inform the look of the book. I think you've talked about the library. How about some of the other venues that make up your story?
Yeah, New York is such a cinematic town, isn't it? There's so many great locations. And so having gone and watched a summer swing at Lincoln Center, where every summer, and I think it's once a week, they have, you can show up and just dance, and they'll have a live band outside. And it's such a fun New York thing to do. And I always try and walk by at least once every summer to catch it. And that's very, again, you feel like you're in a movie when you're on the plaza of Lincoln Center doing that. And then the club CBGB, I hadn't ever gone there. I'm not quite my thing. But I knew I wanted my librarian to find herself and to just release, everything she's going through by going to this club and listening to really loud punk music. And luckily there was so much documentary footage on it that I could get a sense of I think I've been in once, actually. I shouldn't say I haven't, but I could kind of see what it was like and how best to describe it. And that's very helpful in working on these books, is being able to find footage or photos that inspire me, because it is so visual. It really is. And you're hoping the reader can create and construct something in their head that is a world of its own. And that helps. It helps being in New York because there are so many opportunities for a great setting.
Well, and I think the interesting thing about both Laura and Sadie is, if you think about it, they start out in such very traditional roles, but they are both very counterculture as well. And I think you played on that dynamic very well.
Yeah, I like to think that they're both out of step with their time. That Laura in the 1910s is ahead of her time in a way of wanting more than being a wife and mother and wanting to find financial independence. And then you have Sadie, who works with rare books and wears vintage clothes and, is following an advice book from the 1800s. And so she's not quite of the 1990s at all either. And I think that adds attention to the book that helps, hopefully helps the reader sympathize with them a little more.
But in the end, she uses her librarian skills and brings it home, so.
Yes, she does.
Okay, Fiona, this is a very specific question about the plot and two characters. Why did Harry never try to contact Pearl? He had to know that she was ill since he knew the nanny who was working for Lonnie. And then I really enjoyed this novel. Thank you.
Thank you. To me, Harry and the nanny are not in touch at that point. The nanny's kind of, gone renegade basically. And so for him, I think he feels it's better for him. He's so guilt-ridden that he doesn't want to face up to what he's done. And that would mean engaging with his family again, even though he misses them dearly. And like his father, he takes all that blame on himself for the tragedy of what went wrong, just as the father in a way does the same thing. And so it's just a family of secrets and they can't get past it. And I love exploring the idea of how secrets go through generations and how they affect later generations. And so, yeah, to me, Harry does not know that Pearl is sick and dying.
Yeah, and how sometimes the secrets of the family last for generations, right? And what makes them so hard to break through? I really like this question. What is the significance of the homeless woman outside the library?
You know, it's so funny. People ask that. And it just, to me, she symbolized everything that Laura fears. She's a symbol of everything that could go wrong. And I think a lot of women feel that, of what happens when I'm 80 and I'm alone and I'm, you know, how am I going to manage? And I think a lot of people feel that, but for me and my friends, that is the thought. And we've decided we're going to do a group home and we're all set. But I think that, to me, the beggar woman is just everything that can go wrong if she doesn't achieve some kind of financial independence. Because I think deep down, even early on, she knows her husband is not to be relied on, and she's going to have to do it herself. Oh, and can I mention one thing about Columbia Journalism School?
I was going to ask, so please.
Yeah, I know that hasn't come up yet, but you know, everyone asked me, did you have a terrible time when you got your master's at Columbia Journalism School? And I have to say, no, it was really good. And I think, you know, I read a really interesting history of the school as my research, and it was so sexist back in the 1910s, as was the rest of society. And women were sent on a different track. And there was a professor who would skulk the hallways looking for women who were being indecent. And so I drew on all these facts, but when I went in 2000, it was a completely different experience. I enjoyed every minute. It taught me everything about writing and shaping a story. And just to show how things have changed, when Laura goes, it's 15% women. And these days, the Columbia Journalism School is 75% women. So things have certainly changed.
Fiona, can you take a minute to, you talked about how important New York is in helping you create environments and venues for your characters, but give us a sense of what it's, you're a longtime resident of New York. You know, I hear it from my daughter who was there and was back for 100 days, and now she's been back for 100 days. New York's different.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, we've kept the rate really low. I think it's still under 1%. And so I think because we were hit hard and we were hit early, people automatically stepped up to the plate. So people wore masks, people social distanced, everyone's eating outside. So it almost feels like if you go to the West Village, it feels like you're in Italy or somewhere. There's this kind of feeling of a party on the street wherever you go. And it's working, which is really, really exciting. At one point, even the lions on the front of the library wore 3-foot wide masks. And you know, I was just out earlier, and I would say 95 to 96% of people are wearing masks and being careful. And I think we've figured out so far that's working, and it's working really well. Schools are starting up, and fingers crossed.
So Linda talked a little bit about your next book, but we want to give you a minute or two to talk about it as well. This is a group that I know is going out to get it. So wet their whistle a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So the next book is set at the Frick Collection. And that's a building that not a lot of people know about, but if you have gone there, it becomes your favorite museum in New York. It was a Gilded Age mansion on 5th Avenue and 70th Street on the east side that was owned by Henry Clay Frick and his family. And after his wife died, the building was left to the city, and it became a museum because he had this extensive art collection inside. And so it takes place in 2 different time periods, 1919 and 1966. And we're going back and forth in time again with, a mystery to figure out what happened. And the family, the Frick family, it's the first time I'm kind of dealing with real people. And they were really interesting and quite the characters. So we'll see how it goes. It's been really interesting to work on. I have it sitting right over there.
Well, I don't think you have access to chat, but immediately 2 of our guests say, love the Frick, and the next one, love the Frick. So there's certainly awareness. You're kind of answering this next question about that next book, but maybe a little bit longer term. Do you think you will continue to write historical fiction, or is there another genre you would like to explore?
Oh, that's exciting. You know, I love mystery, like Tana French, that kind of like a meaty mystery full of interesting characters. that would be really interesting to maybe do a contemporary one around that with one timeline. I mean, once you start doing 2 timelines, it's crazy. I can't believe I chose that as my first book, because it's insanely difficult. And if I'd known what I was doing, I would have never done it. But now that I do them, I do enjoy the back and forth and how it shows 2 time periods and how things have changed. But yeah, I think one time period. I also think it'd be fun to maybe go to England and write a historical fiction book there based on a building, you know, like the Globe Theatre or the Tower of London. Can you imagine? We could go way back. So we'll see what happens.
So no pressure, Fiona, but someone asks, when will the book on Frick be done?
You know, it is due to my publisher in May. So the release will be a little later next year, but we'll see. It's going well. So maybe I'll get it in early and we'll get it in for the summer, but sometime next year.
So I know Lyons was chosen for Good Morning America's book club, which must have been exciting for you to get that level of publicity. Talk to us about that experience, and how about just the overall experience of author talks in the COVID world?
Yeah, you know, I was amazed at how my publisher and the marketing team and the publicity team really figured out how to do a virtual tour. And it's been incredible being able to reach so many people so easily. And you know, I've taken advantage of it when I've read a good book, like recently I read The Exiles by Christina Baker Klein. Such a good book. And then immediately Googled her Zoom talk so I could see what the background was. And normally you'd never be able to do that. You'd have to catch her in New York and hope you were here at the same time. So that's been great. And yeah, hearing about Good Morning America, I learned it about a month before the pub date. And then you are sworn to secrecy. You are not allowed to tell a soul because they want it to be a surprise. And so I was so excited. And when they announced it on the show and did the interview, it was terrific. And then a couple of weeks later, I got a call from my agent and my editor, and they let me know that the book had hit the New York Times bestseller list. And that was just an incredible day. I was walking through Central Park when they called, and I started screaming.
Oh.
But it's been really just such a joy, and readers have been so supportive, and I think all of us have found solace in books at this time as we're staying home and, you know, being safe, and so I just appreciate everybody's support.
Well, of course, we see the library behind you, but I've got to ask, are you an ebook reader as well, or do you stick to hardbacks?
You know, these days, I'm getting a lot of books to blurb, meaning you get early copies, and if you like it, you write a note that might go on the back saying, hey, I love this book. And they tend to come in PDF form. So I'm reading on my Kindle a lot of books because the galleys are no longer physical copies. But I prefer a real book. I just finished Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. Oh boy, I see people nodding. Wasn't that good? I mean, even the way he describes weather is so good. And being able to read his book as a book and supporting my local independent bookstore, which is so important in this time, it's win-win.
Well, Fiona, we are at 8:10, and so that is our closing time. So as a wrap up, on behalf of everyone on the call today, congratulations on all that you're doing. We're so happy for you, and I shared before you got on how many reserves there are on your various formats here at Columbus Metropolitan Library, which means they are going to Gramercy Books because they're not waiting. So it's a win-win for all of us. But thanks for all that you do. Thanks for the other writers that you inspire, and we're really looking forward to your next book. And when this is all over, let's have you visit us here in Columbus. We'd love to see you.
I'd love to meet you in person, Pat. Thank you so much for handling all this and moderating. I truly appreciate it. And thank you to Linda. It's such a pleasure to see you, even though we can't see each other in person.
Well,
it's a pleasure to have you here, and I'm excited that your next book is not too far away, and so that will be the wonderful setting to have you come back to Columbus and to meet Pat and to visit his gorgeous Columbus Metropolitan Library and meet Wally again. And Pat, thank you so much for doing such a tremendous job moderating both the book club discussion as well as your wonderful talk with Fiona. And Fiona, just, you know, so much, I've read all of your books and I look forward to the Frick and many more, and to our friendship. And thank you to Maddie Shepard, our back end manager, who does such a wonderful job. She's up there in the corner waving. And if you just take a final look at the chat box, I know Maddie's gonna put once again Eventbrite links to register for next month's discussion of the Paris Hours and November's discussion of how to be an anti-racist. And we've also included a link to register for tomorrow night's poetry night featuring Ohio's first poet laureate, Amit Majmudar, at the launch of his new collection, What He Did in Solitary. So just to let everyone know, Gramercy Books, it continues to be open from 10 to 6, 7 days a week, and we continue to provide curbside pickup for your convenience. Thank you so much for spending, Fiona and Pat, and for all of you for spending part of your evening with Gramercy Books. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.